So we're here at the Community College Leadership Symposium for Tarleton State University. It's our second presentation, and this presentation is going to be about instruction. And this is a presentation from students in my Community College Leadership course, and I'm excited to hear what they've got to present to us this evening. We have Raven Battles, Yuri Escobedo, Caitlin Miller, and Jasmine Rodriguez. So take it away.
Good evening, class. We're going to be going over community college instruction. So a little about a community college instruction. It's first intended for people to gain knowledge that they needed to know so they can become an asset to their society and their community. So basically just giving them the skills that they need and nothing more or less. In the past, local policymakers promoted the early two-year colleges, normally called junior colleges at the time, to improve communities and provide opportunities for local students to study. So that's where it got its name, community college. Everybody from the community goes here to study. They gain their knowledge and then become apt to their society. Educators were looking for students throughout their education and begin to look further beyond a transfer, but for vocational training for those individuals. So basically anything that just the class size that they needed, the courses that they needed in order to move on and get a job in what they needed rather than going through other prerequisite classes and things like that.
So I'm going to talk about our summary of our literature review that we have all been involved with throughout this course. So as we just previously stated in the introduction, kind of where the path started. So it was really providing working class Americans access. So there were a lot of different resources that mentioned marginalized groups as women, working class Americans, teachers, really all were some intent behind community college instruction. And so the instruction started as instructing those people to get whatever type of degree may be necessary. So what we know of present day community colleges, there are a lot of different types. I'm sure we learned over this course. So there are instructional designs for vocational programs. So students that are working towards some type of vocational or certificate. Then of course there's instruction designed around degree seeking students. There is, I believe it was 19 states that allow to your colleges to give out bachelor's degrees. So that's why we're specific there with associates or bachelor's. Also transfer students, which are probably degree seeking in the end, but may not necessarily obtain their degree. And then the instruction around remedial and entry level courses. So whatever type of remedial course that may be. I think I heard the other group, I just came in at the end speaking about testing out of certain things, right? So this would be the opposite. So this would be if you were not testing at the level you should be. And so the instruction is designed for those types of courses. So we know in recent years, there's been a big shift, of course, especially in the pandemic. So there's been a big shift with how to deliver to students instructionally, and then also to make degrees just more accessible overall. So students that in the past maybe weren't getting supports they need, there has been a change to try to have inclusive instruction, try to provide basically college survival. So we also have realized that faculty and staff are less prepared than they realized when we went full virtual in many states. So the new types of instruction, some of them may not be adequately prepared or trained on it. A lot of research is showing when you're reviewing the articles that they feel like they need more training because they're just not giving quality instruction, especially on this virtual and distant learning. So when we're speaking of community college instruction, there's definitely some room for growth in the future and just some ways that the faculty have chimed in. And then there are benefits to these different instructional types, with virtual being kind of the way of the world now. What we're reading is that there actually is a big increase in certain types of students who are benefiting from instructional types. In that same breath, of course, there are those who struggle more. And there were several articles that said females do better overall in virtual type instruction. But when we're speaking of the different types of students, one example is that a student who is an English language learner, they have actually been thriving in this online environment and have been able to collaborate even more because they may have had public speaking fear or fear of not knowing the language as well. So since a lot of these virtual options have chat features or reading and maybe using something like a Padlet, those students have been able to be more successful or be more collaborative that they had not in the past. So that was kind of a quick summary of all the different types of instruction and where we started and where we're going.
All right, my name is Yuridia Navarro. I will be speaking over our observations. We had the opportunity to observe what practices are being implemented in community colleges in regards to instruction through social media accounts and webinars, even through our interview sessions. Let me off this. So community colleges take in for consideration their demographic of students. And with that being said, a lot of their decisions on how instruction is given is how are they going to accommodate to the students that they serve. Colleges serve students in dual credit programs and even non-traditional students. And sometimes they are in the same classes. So being able to adjust, accommodate, and meet student needs is important, especially because a dual credit student may not have the same resources and tools as a non-traditional student, or their learning pace may be different than their the other population. So evening and possibly weekend classes have also been implemented to work around student schedules. Again, community colleges serve a specific kind of population, and a lot of these students are working full-time jobs. And these classes that work around their hours kind of help them to be able to be flexible with their scheduling. Adjusting to hybrid and asynchronous instruction is very important. With that being said, COVID kind of just pushed a lot of this online schooling. So being able to scheduling and visiting an instructor during office hours seemed to be something that we observed as very important for one-on-one interaction, because you really don't get that through the hybrid and asynchronous method. Technology is a major factor to how instruction is received by students. Again, COVID kind of just brought all this technology upon to us. Even like in schools, like high schools, computers were in internet hotspots were given to students to be able to access these things. So having Zoom meetings being placed to help with online courses, and online platforms such as Blackboard and Canvases are used to give instruction and be able to communicate with one another. I also learned that frequent trainings from instructors or for instructors on the use of technology in today's day and age. That way, because technology is always expanding and there's always a new piece of advice or device. So just being able to stay updated on how to work things is very important. And I think it's great that community colleges are being able to provide these for their instructors. And again, so all these practices have been set to produce student success.
So a little bit about our expert interview insights. So we all interviewed different people, but they all came from a community college. So for Caitlin, she interviewed Miss Muffet, and it gave her kind of the inspiration to go ahead and start off as a part-time adjunct instructor, which her interview made it plausible for her to, achieve these goals that she wants. Also, Miss Muffet she teaches 2 different courses in her community college. So there are options for an instructor to do one course, but then also refer back to another course. We also kind of discussed how community college instruction just does more in hand with virtual classes and online things rather than in person. So most of the time they're distant, which will kind of put a little barrier in between the instructor and the student. While creating content for a classroom or subject, there are many mentors that are available for, incoming instructors. We all were able to interview our instructor that had as some kind of mentor that they were able to go to and to access in the time of creating content for the classroom. Another insight that we got from our interviewees were just staying informed through professional development, seeing how they can grow themselves, but while they're growing, it'll be successful for their kids or their students to grow as well. Learning technology courses to keep up to the up-to-date online teaching, which Yori addressed in her previous slide, that technology is always changing. There's different things. I mean, we all had trouble trying to share our screen today, so just staying up to date and things like that. With Raven's interview, they told her that the data is used all day, every day. Professor Sims categorized data into 3 areas: recruitment, retention, and completion. So the department uses the recruitment purposes to project which programs are needed for each campus and to see basically what classes help the students develop better. And they learned, were able to keep the knowledge that they got from class. The thing that our interviewees had mentioned was that a lot of community colleges operate on a small budget, especially for their instructors. Most of the things that they have to teach on are things from previous years or from an instructor who already retired and things like that. So kind of just going around in circles rather than being able to expand their budget, which will help them in helping their students succeed. Also, they had said just to stay engaged and involved, like taking any professional development classes and things like that, so they can keep their mind fresh, which will then pass on to their students and help them succeed as well.
To talk about the best practices, we gathered a lot of this information from the interviews, the observations that were taken, and then also just evaluating what we've learned from the previous introduction in the history, and then articles that we would later read on throughout the course. And through that, specifically looking at community college instruction, we identified 3 best practices, the first one being evaluations. To relate it to the previous presentation of finance, we talked about performance funding. And this is kind of where community college instruction can come in play, because you are also having to evaluate whether or not that course is growing and developing, and evaluations play a key role in that. There's a huge demand for community colleges, not just from the student perspective, but also from the workplace. And so community colleges and likewise vocational programs are having to effectively and accurately prepare those students. Outside of course evaluation, there's also an emphasis on faculty and their training or instructional methods. We've come across articles that had mentioned students particularly being concerned with how they're being instructed or how the information is being relayed to the students. And so faculty being able to not only grow on the technical aspect of providing instruction, but also evaluating the course materials. Often we are also received course evaluations for students to fill out. So it is encouraged that students do complete those. Even within this course, we've been asked questions regarding the method of how the material was delivered. So that's a great practice that can be utilized to make sure that we are better reaching students. And next point is going to be DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. This point and practice recognizes the issues concerning diversity, equity, and inclusion, and primarily on the need for training and development and recognizing those potential issues that can arise. One of the exercises was that we watched a webinar on YouTube, and there's 4 of us in our group, and 3 of us happened to watch the same video and found that it was pretty much centered on how instructors can utilize initiatives that were brought on by DEI to better serve their students. We talk about the diversity of the classroom, and that's great to have, but if you're not utilizing that as a time to really invest in those students and understand those students, then that can be lost, since most of the time is spent. What I've seen is through some of the observations is that a lot of that is put on student affairs or student development to meet those needs of being multicultural or intercultural. However, those should also be expanded to faculty. And from the questions of the panel from the webinar, it seems that majority of faculty members are just as eager to learn how they can implement and better understand their students in their classroom. So there should be a considerable investment and interest in wanting to better understand those diverse communities. And so we do believe another best practice is not only telling faculty to be more diverse or involved, but also providing that professional development, having those webinars, having those trainings for their faculty to better serve their students. And then the final point kind of goes along with that same topic of DEI, of engagement. So once you've got these groups of students together, one, it could be a culture shock for some students. So if our discussions that we've had kind of go back to how it was when you first started in, and just realizing that the community may be bigger than the one that you grew up in. And so once you're thrown into the classroom, it could be a little different in trying to navigate those different perspectives and backgrounds. And so a best practice for community college instructors is to lean in on that and actually be able to help students engage and interact in a diverse community. Not only will that help the student individually, but also whenever they enter in the real world as well. These interactions have to be explicitly taught and facilitated by those instructors, because oftentimes it's hard enough to get students to participate actively in the classroom. It's going to be even harder to have students actively participate with students that they may on the surface may not think that they have much in common with. So really encouraging an environment to not only learn from the professor, but also learn from each other. So again, that environment for group learning has to be established rather than expected. Okay, so key takeaways for today, or you can think of them as reflections. The first part was mostly how we prepare students for the workplace and society. That's a big role that community colleges do play, and how more so community instruction can relate to that. Is making sure that we're keeping up and matching the demands of the current workforce, providing particular courses that will actually benefit the community. And so making sure that we are also keeping up with the trends of what that actual local community may need. Like a student, believe it was Charles that mentioned, that his local community was evolved around with the town. So making sure that we're providing those courses that will actually reach students. And then more so connecting the community as well with providing that instruction and providing an environment and conversation around education is important as well. This is kind of relates to back with the interview that one of us had with one of the professors, in which they talked about how they're engaging and also presenting to the community the importance of education, and really trying to make that connection, not just being another institution that is in a town, but actually making a difference. Another takeaway for our area is serving a diverse student body. This is pretty general for community colleges. I think all of our expert areas has this pool because of such a diversity that this enrollment typically pulls from. And that can be, just on physical, but also we've explored in our discussion post how that includes social, class, even ability or disability. So there's just so many areas. It's really a opportunity for students to meet people who they probably would have never interacted with as well. And so we definitely want to make sure that we are serving those students well, not just on the socially side, but also when it comes to their instruction. So that requires a lot of adjustment, reevaluating, and then just being flexible and able to learn. And then which leads into our last takeaway, which is evaluating and growing. Again, it can't be a stagnant process. A lot of our research, we saw articles where certain math classes or history classes were showing how they were growing and trying to expand and find better ways to reach students. Not everybody learns the same way. And so we have to take those needs into concern. And then that way we can better serve students and grow those numbers, which will help other areas, including finance, for example. And then making sure that we are providing the exact resources and programs that those students can actually utilize. And so here's the list of the references that we did use throughout the presentation. And so that will pretty much conclude our time.
That's a great presentation. So what are some, and I would also kind of remind you, class to have some questions, and also a sample question is how does this affect your area? But what are, maybe what's one thing that you learned as a result of focusing on this expert area?
Personally, me was I never took in consideration the fact that community colleges are serving so many, I know that they serve so many different kind of populations and people with different backgrounds, but coming to the realization that sometimes you have a high school student and you have a 50-year-old student in the same class, so just being able to accommodate to their needs is very important, and the instructor and administrators need to take that in for consideration.
I think for me, I guess like our most impactful part, I guess, was the webinar. And so Raven spoke about how I think there were 3 of us that watched the same webinar, but we all had different takeaways. So just how much the faculty or instructors get pulled on their side, because I've been a public education teacher, so I'm very aware of how much weight is put on to educators. But for example, in the webinar, there was a person giving an example. She was an instructor that her department head told her, be careful, because if all your students start getting good grades, then you are going to be looked at as not rigorous enough. And so they're going to start evaluating you. But then her goal, of course, was for all of her students to be successful and get high grades and push them there. So I think for me, it was pretty eye-opening, and especially sitting down, talking with an instructor as well about just even though that we're teaching adults maybe in community colleges, they're still having the same struggles as just a public educator would.
I think one thing I enjoyed was just that there are community colleges that are, there to help out the new coming instructors, that they have mentors and people who are there to help them as well. Because I mean, some of us might even be the same age as an instructor, and we're like, whoa, you're not that far off from me. Like, how can you teach me in a sense where I'm also going to learn the same thing, but be successful?
I'd agree with the flexibility aspect as well, not just with the diversity in the classroom, but also the methods, having to provide weekend courses.
Go ahead and finish.
Go ahead, Raven.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if it was a connection thing on my side. But yeah, providing weekend courses, night courses, and also it kind of put in perspective as well, just being an instructor, how there's quite a lot to balance. So kudos to those who choose that route. It's a lot that goes into it. So that.
Thank you for that. I appreciate all of your reactions of what you got out of the area. I think hopefully all of you realize, I put together a general class, but I try to create the expert areas to give you all opportunities to kind of explore a topic that you find or you want to learn more about. So hopefully you all had an opportunity to do that. Looks like we've got several questions, which is great. And let's see, Alita, what's your question?
Well, first of all, ladies, y'all did an amazing job with the presentation. So thank you all for, sharing that with the class. I did have two questions, but y'all answered one of them, which was about the instruction and how much different it is to deal with like early college students. But you touched on it briefly. Professors and instructors, they have to be able to adapt to different age groups, which is great. But my second question was, you all mentioned how difficult it has been for some students during COVID, to get used to online instruction. And same thing goes for some professors, like they had to be online all the time, and it's been a very hard adjustment for them. And they have to make themselves more available. And you all, you touched on having to, one, make themselves more available, to offer like weekend classes or night classes. But I'm just curious to see, did you all find anything on like any policies or any discussions going on to advocate for professors that are, kind of feeling burned out about it? Because you all touched on like the issues that are going on, but is there anything being talked about so there's like some kind of change?
For my part, I don't think I saw anything about any, like, I guess, help for professors in a sense like that. It was just more of community colleges like having technology classes for professors so they can learn how to use the technology correctly in order for them to, have those classes where they can reach their students. But as for like policies or any other help, I didn't see anything.
I would agree. I think it's just the implementation of trainings and resources. I'm sure there's all kinds of resources. It's not just technology that's being taught to these instructors. And yeah, I also didn't see like no specific policy on how to like help instructors, especially in this time where we're stuck in online, but just the trainings. And it's not just like a one-time training, it's like multiple trainings throughout the year.
Oh, thank you for that. Rosemary, what's your question?
I know you all mentioned trainings for it. One of my questions were, do you know if in your readings if there were any mandatory professional development for the instructors? I know at the community college where I work, there are mandatory, so many hours of mandatory professional development, and maybe to help them deal with some diversity, professional development for diversity, professional development for, like you mentioned, having dual credit students in the same classes with maybe veterans or non-traditional students, how to deal with that? Did you come across any?
As far as articles, I can't say I've come across specific articles, but when I was actually in the interview, the professor did mention that she was a part of, they're mostly encouraged to join professional organizations, particularly higher ed professional organizations. There's a couple of them also in the Tarrant County area where she does work, and they're often conferences. There's also, depending on the school or university, or even how their employee benefits work, you can get funding for going to those conferences for a part of professional development. She's also been able to create grants. So another kind of area I learned is that you may want to also learn how to do grant writing somewhere along the line to be able to fund those as well. So I would say, can't give you a link to the source for those, but from the mentorship and from other instructors that she was able to connect with when she started, there are opportunities that may not be mandated, but if you seek, you'll find.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to piggyback a little bit off of Raven, when I did my interview, I actually interviewed a Spanish educator. She also said that she attended just diverse classes just to kind of fit in, you know, the different cultures, like because there's not just Hispanic Mexicans going for, you know, a Spanish degree. There are so many different races and ethnicities that are fitting in. And she talked about like going to those classes and having each of them connect, but also inviting her students to these classes so that they can understand from her perspective of, you know, they all don't learn the same, but they're all trying to reach the same goal of being successful.
Thank you. So next question is from Colin Hooper.
Hey, okay. Actually, Raven just answered one of my questions regarding like professional development, how to go about it. The other question I had was regarding the instructors for community colleges. When y'all were researching this, did y'all come across anything about the kind of qualifications they need, particularly compared to universities? At one point, Dr. Edwards mentioned that community colleges don't focus on research so much. So I wondered if maybe they have a more rigorous requirement for the instruction side of things for their instructors, if that makes sense.
In my interview, she said master's degree and 18 hours in a specific area. I'll let anyone else chime in on that as well. But outside of that, there wasn't any particular extra from what I understand.
On the
Master's
credit
degree and
side,
18
that
hours.
tends to be the case. Sometimes on the non-credit side, sometimes they can do some different things, but typically that's the case on the credit side.
If I can chime in, Dr. Edwards, I'm actually in the job that I just got as a credentialing specialist. And I know the vice presidents of the different departments and the deans, they get together annually and they decide upon what qualifications are required to teach each individual course. And those qualifications are mandated by SACS. And then there's the higher educational board that are mandated, and then there's some local college boards. But yeah, for most transfer courses, it's master's degree, and if you don't have a master's degree in that discipline, it has to be a master's degree with a minimum of 18 credit hours in that discipline to teach transfer courses. And yes, different for workforce courses and continuing ed courses.
Thank you.
But they're all mandated by SACS.
And just for those that work in
sorry.
K-12 or other areas, that's the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools,
Yes.
and particularly the Commission on Colleges. So thank you for that question. Next question comes from Mara.
Thank you. You guys talked about the best practices that faculty members have to follow to encourage their students to engage with their classroom. And so I was just wondering if there are any specific best practices that faculty use to encourage student engagement in their community.
I'll kind of go off just speaking to the professor and then also kind of the webinar. So just from both of those pieces, and this of course is very limited information, but from what I gathered, there really is a lot on the instructor, just kind of going back to what people were saying earlier about them taking upon themselves to join different professional learning, professional development. So when I was inquiring about, for example, my person that I interviewed taught math online. And so I know that that's difficult. And so we were talking about kind of some best practices, and she did have a mentor, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of them do. She had support and she had people she could reach out to. but there was really just a syllabus kind of given to her. And so, I mean, of course, there was more support, but really as far as best practices, she just took what she had known as a public school educator for a while and brought that in. And then I know in the webinar, they really stressed for teachers who are doing these outside things. So whether that be finding best practices or taking it upon themselves with what Raven was speaking about, DEI. So those teachers, they're kind of hoping that they'll be trailblazers because in a lot of institutions, it's just not the norm to have something set up for best practices. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add that may be more specific.
Thank you for that. Our last question is from JC.
Hello. First off, great presentation. Thank you all for sharing. I wanted to, y'all mentioned that some instructors that teach online only classes sometimes feel distant from their institution. Did y'all find any research on how those instructors can feel more connected to their institution and their students, or have any ideas of your own?
I think my instructor, again, she did like professional development through her college in the summer. So I feel like that is a way for the college to kind of reach out and feel a little bit more of a connection with their instructors. So that's what I would, how I would answer the question. I didn't see like a specific research on that.
Kind of picking back off of Yuri, that was more from the expert insights interview that we did. So most of our professors who did do online classes, they just kind of felt that there was like a little bit of barrier, but also earlier in the presentation we had, Yuri had also mentioned that kind of the students who are shy and things like that, there are like, a chat system in order for them, to type out their question rather than asking. But for research wise, I don't believe that I saw anything that can help professors, feel, connected to their students rather than, possibly setting up a fun little Zoom meeting or, things like that. Which I would probably suggest, or, somewhere where they can, get to know their professor type of thing. I know Dr. Edwards sent out, the survey we had to do where he got to know a little bit about us, but then we also saw like, a little oversight of, what he does at, at Tarleton and things like that. So I definitely think like a little about me from professors will probably help just a little bit. Or setting up like, a fun little Zoom meeting when students can come and basically ask questions or just talk and engage.
I also feel like the student has to want to reach out. The instructor can set up office hours, but it has to be the student to want to set those times up with the instructor. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. This has been a great presentation. I'm looking forward to the remaining presentations. Thank you all so much. Let's see.